can see my screen and everybody else as well? Wonderful. So today we're going to be talking about the issues affecting our on-prem NAV and VC clients. And we're going to be talking through the options, what we can do and how we can help you. My name is Danusha Jolliffe. I'm the Marketing and Customer Services Director here at TVision. And I've been with the business about 6 years now. I'm also joined by Mike. If you could just give us all a quick introduction. People have worked with you previously.
Hi there. So I'm Mike, IT consultant at TVision. I've been working with TVision for 20-ish years, so quite a long time now. So yeah, I'm here as a consultant to talk to you today about the technical issues.
Okay, so we have the three issues that we'd like to discuss: the on-premise security vulnerability, the SQL Server end-of-life information, and also the Windows Server 2012 R2 end-of-life. This was all included in a blog, and the link's there, and we will be sending this out to you afterwards. So Mike, over to you. Can I ask you to talk through those three issues that are potentially affecting our clients?
Yeah, sure. So as you're probably aware from reading the blog, back in December last year, Microsoft realized that there was a security vulnerability that's affecting NAV and BC and has been there since 2009. So it's been around a while and it's just been identified. The vulnerability itself, it's fairly low risk. It lowers the risk even more depending on how you're set up. If your clients are in a secure network behind a firewall or a VPN, that really goes down quite a bit. It's what the vulnerability can do via the Windows client. If an attacker connects onto a machine that's on your network that has got the Windows client running, and that Windows client is also authenticated, then the attacker could exploit a vulnerability which potentially could let them take over using the service account. So again, it really is, if your network is secure, you're sitting behind a firewall, or you're using a VPN for your client, that vulnerability is pretty low, but it's just something that we've obviously got to make you aware of, as Microsoft found out in December. As far as I know, nobody has actually reported having this exploited, and the vulnerability has been around, as I say, for 13 years.
Someone has actually asked a question saying, does it affect the web client as well?
Okay, no, it purely affects the full fat Windows client that's installed on the laptops or desktops, and I say it has to be authenticated as well for that vulnerability to be exploited. Okay. The versions of NAV go way back to, I think it's 2013. So 2013, which version 7, that hasn't been affected for that version, but it's everything going forward. So it's 2013 R2, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, and then all the Business Central versions right through. Microsoft have released a cumulative update for the fix, and that goes back to so 2013 R2. They've released a cumulative update. It's a technical update, so it's effectively just the files, the DLLs, executables that need to be installed, upgraded on the server, and also every client machine. So depending on the number of client machines you've got, it can be a pretty big job. So weigh that up really with the risk. If your network is secure, etc., then really it's up to you guys how you want to proceed with that. And it's the same with Business Central. There's been wave updates have been released to fix it as well.
Okay. Can you cover off the SQL Server point next?
Yeah. So Microsoft obviously end of life on just on my notes on SQL. Obviously, SQL 2005 went end of life back in April 2016. And then we've got SQL Server 2008, which some customers I know are running. That went out end of life 2019. And then most recently, SQL Server 2012, which is still quite heavily used. That went end of life last year in July. And then the next version that's coming up to the end of life is 2014, and that's going to be in July next year. So at that point, Microsoft will stop any service packs, any updates, security updates, things like that for those versions. So if that's a business critical risk that you need to be on the latest version or patched or updated, then that's something you need to think about. Now, generally speaking, obviously, if every case would be individual, we need to look at, but generally speaking, the SQL Server version isn't an issue depending on the version of NAV you're running. I think pretty much, and maybe Rob can correct me if he's in earshot, but I think pretty much any database will quite happily run on any SQL Server version. The problem can be around the operating systems and what versions of SQL will actually be supported and installable on that operating system. And then also then you've got operating system issues with older versions of NAV, which I'll come on to, but SQL Server versions really will support pretty much any database going back.
We've had another question saying, if you upgrade SQL Server, does NAV need to be upgraded as well at the same time?
Okay, so SQL itself, no. However, if you are updating, for example, if you've got a Windows 2008 server, there will be limitations on the versions of SQL you can update to. So I don't think you could put a new version of SQL on a 2008 server. So you would have to upgrade your operating system to be able to install a new version of SQL. And then that will have complications potentially if you're running an older version of NAV that may not be supported running on that operating system. So you'd have to update all three.
Okay. And do you have anything to add on the Windows Server? Or?
Yeah, so 2012 R2 and 2012, which coming end of life in October this year, they're still heavily used. We've got a lot of clients, and a lot of the world is still using 2012 R2. But it's really just to make people aware that that is becoming end of life. And obviously, as a server, there'll be no security updates will be coming down the line when that goes end of life in October. So again, for some businesses that do need to keep everything secure and up to date and patched for various reasons, that's obviously something that people need to think about.
Great, thank you. Another question's come in that I missed earlier. It was, does it make a difference if we use Windows authentication versus user and password, which I'm assuming relates to the first section that we were talking about? So I may need Rob to answer that specific question on the security. I believe it potentially will be any authenticated user. However, it could be that it needs to be domain authenticated. So I don't know whether Rob can possibly answer that question. Yeah, we've got Rob here in the room as well for some of these more technical questions. Rob.
It should work. The attack should be with any authentication. It does depend on the authentication being testable before the attack can be mounted. So somebody actually has to authenticate to the service, and then the attack proceeds. Okay. Yeah.
So it has to be an authenticated user on the machine that's already been attacked and taken over. But then any connection into NAV, whether it's using Windows authentication or username and password.
Okay. Anything else to add on those three? That cover those mainly as well. I mean, it's highlighted within the blog, but I think it's important to hear it from you directly.
Yeah. I mean, 2012 R2 is widely used, and that's obviously coming up to end of life. Obviously, previous to that, I think Windows 2008 went end of life January 2020. Some people still use that, but obviously not too many. And then before that, we're going back to Windows 2000, which went end of life 2010. So really, it's just to highlight the 2012 coming up for end of life.
Okay, great, thank you. So just trying to advance the slides. So when we sent the information out, obviously to outline the options and in the relation to the blog that was sent, obviously we've got this first online Q&A session for you to highlight and for anyone else to ask any questions as we're going along. So after this, we were offering a half-hour call with yourself, Mike. So if anyone wants to take us up on that, and then we're quite happy to arrange that for you, just contact us directly and we'll get that sorted out. And then if that is able to resolve and you work out what next steps are, that would be great. And then just as a final option, we're talking about a performance review. I think that's going to be specific and very relevant to each individual client. But can I ask for a really high-level overview, Mike, in case someone is interested in getting that organised?
Yeah, absolutely. So high level, really, performance overview, we'd be looking at things like your operating system version, SQL version, etc., and highlighting any vulnerabilities that may be around SQL or patching, etc. And then really it's more of a deeper dive into SQL itself and see how that's performing. So we would install some monitoring, we would be recording logs. Generally we would maybe record logs, have a week's worth of logs, and then take a review and look at table sizes, if any tables need reducing, truncating, etc. We would be looking at if there's any deadlocks, any locking, and we were pulling the logs out from there and then reviewing on a weekly basis, and maybe doing this over several weeks. Each week, once we discover if there's any indexing that's maybe needed, those indexes would be applied, and then they would be reviewed again a week later. We'll be looking at disk space, backups, maintenance plans around SQL. So that's kind of a high level, what the sort of thing that we can do.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I don't know why my screen was glitching just there. So do you think that would be covered in sort of 4 to 6 weeks, would you say? Is that
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So really there'd be quite a bit of work at the start, installing the monitoring tools, setting up the logging, and then really it's a week by week looking at those logs and analysing the data, and then seeing where we can make recommendations on performance. And then again, the next week, also reviewing, so over a 4 to 6 week period.
Okay. I'm just waiting to see if any more questions come in. Haven't had many more yet. Hold on 1 second. Yep, very quiet audience today. We're expecting a few more questions. So unless anyone else have anything else to ask, what we'll do, this was only intended to be a short session highlighting those 3 areas: the vulnerabilities, the servers, what we're looking to clients, how we can help move forward to make sure that it's secure as possible, and then obviously outline the review as well. Unless, Mike, you have anything to add, I think we can wrap up.
Yeah, no, there's nothing further from me.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining. I know it was a short session. We'll be contacting everybody after this call that registered, who attended and who didn't, and we'll offer the video so you can review the content and also try and arrange that call for you. Thank you, Mike, so much for the time today.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.